Marcus Brennan stared at the steel hatch embedded in the ground, its surface scratched and weathered but still solid. The metal edges were sealed with some kind of industrial compound he didn't recognize. 3 heavy-duty locks secured it, and none of them matched any key he'd been given. The bank paperwork had mentioned outbuildings, fencing, and water rights. It had never mentioned this. The real estate agent had walked him through every inch of the ranch house, shown him the barn, even pointed out property markers. But somehow, everyone had missed a steel hatch large enough for a person to crawl through, buried 20 yards behind the main house. Marcus kicked at the dirt around the edges and felt something give way. This wasn't natural ground settling. Someone had deliberately covered this thing up. 2 weeks earlier, Marcus had walked into Texas First National Bank thinking he was the luckiest man alive. His divorce settlement had left him with enough cash for a fresh start, and the Brennan Ranch seemed like a miracle. 400 acres of prime grazing land in Brewster County for $60,000. The loan officer, a nervous young man with shaking hands, had pushed the paperwork through in record time. No inspection required, no environmental surveys, just sign here and here and here. Marcus should have known something was wrong when the banker wouldn't look him in the eye. Now, standing in the Texas heat with a crowbar in his hands, Marcus realized he'd bought more than just land. The previous owner, according to county records, had been a shell company called Desert Vista Holdings. Before that, the land had belonged to Meridian Chemical Corporation for 30 years. The bank had been eager to offload the property, almost desperate. They'd waived fees, expedited processing, even thrown in a discount for cash payment. Marcus had spent the last 2 weeks cleaning up the ranch house, fixing broken windows, and planning where to put cattle. He'd been measuring fence line when his boot caught on something metallic, a corner of steel, barely visible beneath years of accumulated dirt and tumbleweeds. What he'd uncovered made his stomach turn. This wasn't some old storm shelter or root cellar. The construction looked industrial, professional, the kind of thing built by people who knew exactly what they were hiding. He'd called the county office that morning, asking about permits and historical records. The clerk had been helpful until Marcus mentioned the address. Then her voice had changed, become careful and distant. She'd told him all records from before 1995 had been moved to state archives. Any requests would take 6 to 8 weeks to process. Marcus had thanked her and hung up, knowing he wasn't going to wait 6 weeks for answers. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the property. Marcus gripped the crowbar tighter and positioned it against the first lock. Whatever was down there, someone had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. The bank's hurry to sell suddenly made sense. They'd known about this hatch, known about whatever secrets lay beneath his new ranch, and they'd deliberately kept him in the dark. But as Marcus prepared to break the first lock, he heard the distant sound of an engine approaching down his dirt road. Someone was coming, and he had a feeling they weren't here to welcome him to the neighborhood. Marcus dropped the crowbar and stepped away from the hatch, his heart pounding as a black pickup truck rolled to a stop in front of his house. The driver didn't get out immediately. Instead, the engine idled, while tinted windows concealed whoever sat inside. Marcus felt exposed, standing in the open with the uncovered steel hatch at his feet like evidence of a crime he didn't understand. Finally, the truck door opened. A woman stepped out, mid-20s with dark hair pulled back and sharp eyes that took in everything. She wore jeans, boots, and a badge clipped to her belt. Not Sheriff's Department, Marcus realized as she approached. The badge read, Texas Environmental Commission. You must be the new owner, she said, extending her hand. Elena Vasquez, Environmental Compliance Division. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by, introduce myself. Marcus shook her hand, noticing how her gaze immediately went to the exposed hatch behind him. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or concern. Marcus Brennan. Just bought the place 2 weeks ago. He gestured toward the metal structure. Don't suppose you know anything about this? Wasn't mentioned in any of the sale documents. Elena walked past him, crouching beside the hatch. She ran her fingers along the steel edges, examining the locks with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen similar structures before. Industrial grade, she murmured, more to herself than to Marcus. Heavy-duty ceiling compound. This was built to contain something. Contain what? Elena stood, brushing dirt from her hands. That's what worries me. She pulled a tablet from her truck, fingers flying across the screen. Your property was owned by Meridian Chemical from 1962 to 1994. They manufactured industrial solvents, pesticides, and cleaning compounds. The company went bankrupt after a series of lawsuits. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. What kind of lawsuits? Environmental contamination, groundwater pollution, the kind that makes land worthless for decades. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes held sympathy. Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have you noticed anything unusual about your water? Any strange smells, discoloration, or taste? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been drinking well water for 2 weeks, cooking with it, washing dishes. The taste had seemed a little off, but he'd attributed it to old pipes. It's been a little metallic. I figured the well just needed cleaning. Elena shook her head. We need to get that water tested immediately, and we need to find out what's in this hatch. She looked at the heavy locks. Do you have bolt cutters? In the barn. But shouldn't we get some kind of permit first? Call the county? Elena's laugh was bitter. Mr. Brennan, the county has known about this place for 30 years. If they'd wanted it opened, it would have been opened decades ago. She met his eyes. The fact that you bought this land for $60,000 tells me someone was very eager to make this your problem instead of theirs. As if summoned by her words, Marcus's phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Texas First National Bank. He'd never given them his cell phone number. Aren't you going to answer it? Elena asked, watching his face. Marcus looked from the phone to the hatch to Elena's knowing expression. Suddenly, he understood why the bank had been so eager to sell. Why the paperwork had been rushed. Why no one would meet his eyes during the closing. But before he could decide whether to answer, the phone stopped ringing. Immediately, it started buzzing again. Same number. Someone at the bank was very anxious to talk to him, and Marcus had a feeling it wasn't about his mortgage payment. Marcus declined the call, but immediately his phone started buzzing again. Elena watched him with growing concern as he powered the device off completely. Smart move, she said, but they know you found it now. We need to work fast. They retrieved bolt cutters from the barn, and Elena also grabbed a digital camera and sample containers from her truck. Professional equipment, Marcus noticed. She'd come prepared for exactly this kind of discovery, as she photographed the hatch from multiple angles. Documenting the lock mechanisms and serial numbers, Marcus realized this wasn't a random visit. You knew this was here, didn't you? He asked. Elena paused in her documentation. I suspected. Meridian Chemical had operations across 3 counties. When facilities shut down that quickly, that quietly, things get buried. Literally. She positioned the bolt cutters on the first lock. I've been tracking their legacy sites for 2 years, trying to map contamination patterns. The first lock snapped with a sharp crack that echoed across the empty ranch. The second followed quickly. The third lock was newer, installed more recently than the others. When it broke, Marcus heard a faint hissing sound, like pressurized air escaping. Elena grabbed his arm. Step back. Don't breathe deeply until we know what we're dealing with. She pulled on latex gloves and slowly lifted the heavy steel cover. The hinges moved smoothly despite their age, well-maintained and recently oiled. Someone had been accessing this hatch regularly. The opening revealed a vertical shaft lined with steel, with a ladder leading down into darkness. But it wasn't the construction that made Marcus's blood run cold. It was the smell. Chemical sweetness mixed with something metallic and wrong. Elena immediately covered her nose and mouth with her shirt. Industrial solvents, she said, her voice muffled. Probably chlorinated compounds. This is bad, Marcus. Really bad. She aimed a powerful flashlight down the shaft. The beam revealed a chamber about 10 feet down, with what looked like dozens of steel drums stacked along the walls. Some were labeled with hazard symbols Marcus recognized from his engineering days. Others bore company logos he didn't recognize. All of them appeared to be leaking. Jesus, Marcus whispered. How long has this been here? Based on the construction and the drum types, probably since the late 80s or early 90s. Elena was taking photos continuously now, documenting everything. Right before environmental regulations got serious, instead of paying for proper disposal, they buried their waste on site. Marcus felt sick, and not just from the chemical smell. The groundwater. My well, everything I've been drinking. We'll test it immediately, but Marcus, this explains why the land was so cheap. The bank knew, the county knew, Meridian knew when they sold to that shell company, and the shell company knew when they sold to the bank. Elena's voice was angry now. Everyone knew except you. A new sound reached them from the distance. Another engine, this one larger and moving fast. Elena quickly lowered the hatch cover, though she didn't lock it. "We need to get this documented and reported before someone tries to stop us," she said urgently. As the sound grew louder, Marcus could make out multiple vehicles approaching. Heavy trucks from the sound of it. Elena was already moving toward her pickup, gesturing for him to follow. "Who would want to stop us?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Anyone who's been keeping this secret for 30 years, Elena replied grimly. 3 black SUVs rolled up the dirt road in perfect formation, their tinted windows reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm and pulled him toward the back of the house, away from the approaching vehicles. "These aren't county officials," she whispered urgently. "County doesn't travel in convoys." Marcus's mind raced as they crouched behind a broken-down fence post. "Who are they? Corporate security probably, or lawyers, maybe both." Elena was rapidly uploading photos from her camera to her phone, fingers flying over the screen. "I'm sending everything to my supervisor and the EPA database. If something happens to us, at least there'll be a record." The vehicles stopped in a precise line, and 6 men in identical dark suits emerged. They moved with military precision, spreading out to secure the area. The leader, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes, walked directly to the spot where the hatch lay hidden beneath its steel cover. "He knows exactly where it is," Marcus breathed. Elena nodded grimly. "They've been monitoring this place. Probably have cameras, motion sensors. They knew the moment you started digging around that hatch." The silver-haired man pulled out a satellite phone and made a brief call. Even from their hiding spot, Marcus could hear fragments of the conversation. "Compromised," the man said. "Yes, sir. The new owner and someone from environmental. We'll handle it." "Handle it." The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Elena was already moving, staying low and heading toward her truck. "We need to get out of here now," she whispered. "And we need to contact my supervisor before these people decide we're too much of a liability." But as they reached Elena's pickup, Marcus realized they had a bigger problem. 2 of the men had circled around behind them and now stood blocking their escape route. The leader approached slowly, his hands visible but his expression dangerous. "Mr. Brennan," he said, his voice calm and professional. "My name is Vernon Pike. I represent certain interests that have a stake in this property. I believe you've discovered something that doesn't belong to you." Marcus stood straighter, drawing on every ounce of courage he could muster. "Actually, I think I've discovered something that belongs to the people of this county. Something that's been poisoning their water for 30 years. Pike's smile was razor thin. "That's a very serious accusation, one that could cause unnecessary panic and economic disruption." He gestured toward the hatch. "What you've found is an old storage facility, properly sealed and contained. No threat to anyone. Then why wasn't it disclosed in the sale?" Elena stepped forward, her badge visible on her belt. "Environmental Commission regulations require full disclosure of any hazardous materials on transferred property." Pike's attention shifted to Elena, and his expression hardened. "Ms. Vasquez, isn't it? You're quite far from your usual jurisdiction, and operating without proper authority, I believe." The fact that he knew her name sent alarm bells ringing in Marcus's head. This wasn't a random encounter. These people had been watching, planning, waiting. But waiting for what? "I think," Pike continued, "that we need to have a conversation about what happens next, and what happens to people who interfere with matters that don't concern them." The threat was clear, but Marcus noticed something else. Pike kept glancing toward the road, checking his watch. He was stalling, waiting for something, or someone. The sound Pike had been waiting for arrived as a helicopter approached from the south, its rotors cutting through the evening air with military precision. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm, her face pale with recognition. "That's a federal bird," she whispered. "Someone with serious pull is coming." Pike smiled for the first time since his arrival, but there was no warmth in it. "Ah, right on schedule." He spoke into his radio. "Tell Senator Morrison we're ready to proceed." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Senator Morrison. He'd seen that name in the news recently. Something about environmental deregulation and corporate partnerships. Elena's grip on his arm tightened as the helicopter touched down in the cleared area behind the barn, sending dust and debris swirling through the air. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged from the aircraft, flanked by 2 more security personnel. Even in the fading light, Marcus recognized the silver hair and angular features he'd seen countless times on television. "Senator Jack Morrison," chairman of the Senate Environmental Committee and longtime advocate for business-friendly environmental policies. Morrison strode directly to Pike, ignoring Marcus and Elena completely. "Status report," he said curtly. "The new owner discovered the containment facility. He's been in contact with Environmental Commission personnel." Pike's voice was professional, clinical. "We have a contamination exposure situation." Morrison's eyes finally shifted to Marcus, studying him like a specimen under a microscope. "Mr. Brennan, isn't it? You've purchased a rather complicated piece of real estate." His voice carried the smooth authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I understand you've been asking questions about matters that are frankly above your pay grade." Marcus found his voice, though it came out shakier than he'd intended. "I've been asking questions about poison buried on my land. Questions about why I'm drinking contaminated water while you people cover it up." Morrison's laugh was genuinely amused. "Your land? Mr. Brennan, I'm afraid you've misunderstood the nature of your purchase." He gestured toward Pike, who produced a thick folder from his briefcase. "You see, your deed includes several important clauses that were buried in the fine print. Clauses that give certain government agencies emergency access rights in cases of national security." Elena stepped forward, her badge visible. "National security? This is environmental contamination from illegal corporate waste dumping. There's nothing national security about it." Morrison's attention turned to her for the first time, and his expression hardened. "Ms. Vasquez, we've been monitoring your investigation into legacy chemical sites. Very thorough work, perhaps too thorough." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "I'm told you have family in El Paso, a mother who works as a school nurse, a brother finishing his engineering degree." The blood drained from Elena's face. Marcus felt sick. They weren't just threatening property or careers anymore. They were threatening family. "Now then," Morrison continued, his voice returning to its smooth, senatorial tone, "I think we can resolve this situation in a way that benefits everyone. Mr. Brennan, you purchased this land in good faith, but I'm afraid circumstances have changed. We're prepared to offer you a full refund, plus a substantial compensation for your trouble. Say, $200,000. Marcus stared at the senator in disbelief. They were trying to buy him off, right here in front of the evidence of their crimes. Marcus looked from the senator to Elena, to the steel hatch that had started this nightmare. $200,000 was more money than he'd ever dreamed of having. It would solve every financial problem from his divorce, give him a fresh start somewhere far from toxic waste and corporate conspiracies. All he had to do was walk away and pretend he'd never seen what lay buried beneath his ranch. "What about the people downstream?" Marcus asked quietly. "The families drinking contaminated water? The kids getting sick from chemicals that have been leaking for 30 years? Morrison's expression didn't change, but Pike shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Brennan, you're thinking like someone who doesn't understand the bigger picture. Meridian Chemical employed over 3,000 people in this region. Their operations supported entire communities. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good." "Greater good?" Elena's voice was sharp with anger. "Senator, I've documented cancer clusters in 3 counties surrounding former Meridian sites. Children born with birth defects, families destroyed by medical bills they can't afford. Where's the greater good in that?" Morrison's patience was clearly wearing thin. "Ms. Vasquez, your investigation has been noted and will be taken into consideration. But this particular site requires special handling due to its sensitive nature." "Sensitive how?" Marcus demanded. "What else is down there?" For the first time, Morrison hesitated. Pike stepped closer to his boss, speaking quietly but urgently. Marcus couldn't make out the words, but he caught fragments. "Classified materials," and "Department of Defense contracts." Elena heard it too. Her eyes widened as the implications hit her. "This wasn't just chemical waste disposal," she breathed. "Meridian was doing government contract work, military applications." Morrison's mask of senatorial charm finally slipped completely. "That information is classified at the highest levels. Even discussing it constitutes a federal crime." He gestured to his security team. "I'm afraid we've reached the limits of negotiation." But Marcus was already moving. While everyone's attention was focused on Elena's revelation, he'd been edging toward the steel hatch. In one quick motion, he grabbed the crowbar he'd dropped earlier and brought it down hard on the containment locks Elena had cut but not removed. The metal clanged loudly in the evening air. "If this is so classified," Marcus shouted, "then maybe it's time everyone knew about it." He lifted the hatch cover completely, letting the chemical smell pour out into the night air. Maybe the people of this county deserve to know what their government buried in their backyard. Morrison's face went white with rage. You have no idea what you're doing. The materials in that containment facility could be evidence of national defense programs that are still operational. You could be charged with treason. Then charge me, Marcus said, surprised by his own courage. But first explain to me why American citizens are drinking poison to protect your secrets. That's when Elena's phone, which had been silent since her uploads, suddenly began buzzing frantically. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed to one of shock and then fierce satisfaction. Senator Morrison, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. I think you should know that my supervisor just called an emergency press conference. It seems my earlier uploads triggered an immediate federal investigation. The EPA is en route with a full hazmat team. Morrison's composure cracked completely, for the first time since his arrival. The senator looked genuinely afraid. Morrison was already barking orders into his radio when the distant sound of multiple helicopters filled the evening air. Elena's phone continued buzzing with incoming calls from news outlets, federal agencies, and environmental groups. The story was breaking wide open, and there was no way to contain it now. Sir, we have inbound EPA hazmat units, Pike reported tersely. ETA 15 minutes. Local news helicopter already circling the perimeter. Morrison's political instincts kicked in immediately. We need to control the narrative before this spirals completely out of control. He turned to Marcus with barely controlled fury. You have no idea what you've unleashed. The materials in that containment facility include prototype chemical weapons developed during the Cold War. If that information reaches foreign intelligence services, you'll have blood on your hands. Marcus felt a chill, but Elena stepped forward boldly. If that's true, Senator, then why wasn't it properly secured and disposed of according to military protocols? Why was it buried on private land without oversight? Her voice carried the authority of someone who knew environmental law inside and out. Chemical weapon storage requires constant monitoring and specialized containment. What you're describing is criminal negligence at best, potential war crimes at worst. Morrison's radio crackled with urgent updates. The EPA convoy was now visible on the horizon, accompanied by FBI vehicles and what looked like military transport trucks. The senator's helicopter pilot was already spinning up rotors, preparing for immediate departure. Mr. Brennan, Morrison said urgently, I'm offering you one final chance to accept our compensation package and sign a national security non-disclosure agreement. Walk away now, and you'll be set for life. Refuse, and you'll face federal charges that could put you in prison for decades. Marcus looked down at the open hatch, breathing in the toxic fumes that had been poisoning his neighbors for 30 years. He thought about the families Elena had mentioned, the children born with birth defects, the cancer clusters that no one in government had bothered to investigate. He thought about his own naive excitement at buying a ranch for such a low price, never suspecting the corruption that made it possible. Senator, Marcus said quietly, I bought this ranch fair and square. I found industrial waste and chemical weapons buried on my property without my knowledge or consent. I've been drinking contaminated water for 2 weeks while you and your friends covered up crimes against American citizens. He straightened up, meeting Morrison's glare directly. So no, I won't sign your non-disclosure agreement. And I won't take your blood money. Elena was documenting everything with her phone, live streaming directly to social media platforms and environmental watchdog groups. The chemical smell from the open hatch was getting stronger, and both she and Marcus had begun covering their faces with their shirts. Morrison's facade cracked completely. You're both making a terrible mistake, he snarled. This goes higher than you can imagine. People with real power will not allow this information to become public. That's when the first EPA helicopter touched down, followed immediately by vehicles carrying personnel in full hazmat suits. As federal agents poured out of their vehicles, Morrison made a desperate run for his own helicopter. But Pike hesitated, looking between his fleeing boss and the advancing federal agents. Elena grabbed Marcus's arm. It's over, she said with fierce satisfaction. They can't bury this anymore. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the federal courthouse in Austin, watching Senator Morrison being led away in handcuffs after receiving a 15-year sentence for conspiracy, environmental crimes, and violations of the Chemical Weapons Convention. Pike had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing testimony that brought down 3 more congressmen and a dozen corporate executives. The EPA investigation had uncovered exactly what Elena suspected. Meridian Chemical had been operating an illegal disposal site for both industrial waste and classified military chemical weapons prototypes. The contamination had spread through 3 county water systems, affecting over 12,000 residents. The cleanup would take years and cost the federal government nearly $2 billion. Marcus walked out of the courthouse to find Elena waiting on the steps, a thick folder in her hands. She'd been promoted to lead the EPA's new Legacy Contamination Task Force, investigating similar sites across the western states. Her work on the Brennan Ranch case had already led to the discovery of 6 more illegal disposal sites. "Good news," she said with a smile that had become familiar over the months of depositions and hearings. "The settlement check cleared. The federal government officially purchased your ranch for $12.5 million. Plus, the court ordered Meridian's successor companies to pay you an additional $3 million in damages." Marcus shook his head in amazement. He'd bought the ranch for $60,000 and discovered it was worth millions, not because of the land itself, but because of the government's desperate need to secure the contaminated site. The money would fund the medical treatment center he and Elena were planning to build for affected families. "What about the other families?" Marcus asked. "The ones who've been drinking contaminated water for decades?" Elena opened her folder, revealing a comprehensive settlement agreement. Class action lawsuit was approved. Every affected family receives full medical coverage for life, plus compensation based on their level of exposure. The children born with birth defects get additional support for special needs care. They walked toward Elena's truck, which was parked next to a construction site, where the new Marcus and Elena Brennan Environmental Health Center was taking shape. Marcus had insisted on putting Elena's name on the building, despite her protests. She'd risked her career and her family's safety to help him fight the conspiracy. "Any regrets?" Elena asked as they reached the vehicle. Marcus looked back toward Brewster County, where hazmat crews were still working to excavate and properly dispose of the buried chemical weapons. The steel hatch that had started everything was long gone, replaced by a proper containment facility and monitoring station. Warning signs marked the perimeter, and federal agents maintained round-the-clock security. About buying the ranch? No. Marcus opened the truck door for Elena. "Morrison was right about one thing. I got exactly what I paid for. I just didn't know I was buying a chance to do the right thing." Elena laughed as she climbed into the driver's seat. "You know, there are 14 more sites on my investigation list. Ranches, farms, industrial properties, all sold cheap to unsuspecting buyers who have no idea what's buried on their land." Marcus settled into the passenger seat, buckling his seatbelt. "Sounds like we have our work cut out for us." As they drove away from the courthouse, Marcus thought about that first evening when he'd found the steel hatch. He'd been looking for a quiet place to rebuild his life after divorce. Instead, he'd found his purpose fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Elena reached over and squeezed his hand. "Ready to go find the next buried secret?" Marcus squeezed back, watching the Texas landscape roll past the windows. Somewhere out there, other families were drinking contaminated water. Other corporations were burying their crimes. Other government officials were looking the other way. But they wouldn't be able to hide forever. Not anymore. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where ordinary people uncover extraordinary secrets hidden in the American West. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.